Today on News Pulse, Ukrainian armed forces liberated more of Ukrainian land. Russian oil revenues have set a new low. Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit was a personal victory for Putin, while the US does not apply any sanctions. Hello, we are UATV. My name is, as usual, Henry Keane, and you are, as usual, sincerely welcomed to the News Pulse. Russian forces have been trying to repel Ukrainian attacks in the Pokrovsk direction, where the fiercest battle are currently taking place. According to the General Staff of Ukraine, in just the past day alone, Russian occupying forces have lost 800 KIA, 1 tank and 53 artillery systems. There were 172 combat clashes registered over the past day along all of the front line. As of September 2nd, 425th Separate Assault Regiment Skelia have liberated 2 communities, Novoekonomichne and Udachne, in the Pokrovsk district. It took 2 weeks to clear the streets of Russian troops. Udachne is located approximately 10 kilometers from Pokrovsk. Ukrainian troops destroyed all the enemy strongholds in the area. Before Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, more than 1,500 people lived in the settlement. Recently, on August 25, Ukrainian forces launched a successful counterattack in the Donetsk region, liberating 3 settlements at once: Mikhailivka, Zelenyi Hai, and Volodymyrivka. It might not seem as such to someone as a big success, but the liberation of villages in the Donetsk region is always a major success for Ukraine, especially given that Russia has concentrated over 100,000 troops in the area. Despite Russia's attempts to launch offensive along the entire front line, there has been no recorded progress made, the Institute for the Study of War reports. Meanwhile, the armed forces of Ukraine are actively counterattacking and holding key positions as of now. According to Ukraine's General Staff, the Kremlin's summer offensive campaign has ended in failure. However, Moscow, in a usual Russian manner, just refuses to acknowledge this and deliberately presents a distorted picture of the front line in order to convince itself and Western countries of its so-called inevitable victory. Well, suit yourself. More on this matter in our reportage for you.
Russia's latest seasonal offensive has ended in failure. That's how Ukraine's General Staff described the spring-summer campaign of Russian forces. Over the course of several months, the Russian military lost thousands of units of military equipment and hundreds of thousands of personnel. Meanwhile, Ukraine's defense forces continue to hold the front and demonstrate that no amount of Kremlin propaganda can hide the failure of Russia's offensive, the General Staff concluded.
Russian troops have not gained full control over a single major city. Since the beginning of the year, in senseless battles across Kharkiv, Luhansk, and Donetsk regions, Russia has lost nearly 210,000 soldiers, killed or wounded. Also destroyed or damaged were 2,174 armored combat vehicles, 1,201 tanks, 7,303 artillery systems, and 157 multiple launch rocket systems. From the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine on Telegram. Gerasimov has once again been forced to regroup, adjust timelines, redefine objectives, and recalculate forces and resources, because the forces allocated for the offensive have effectively been burned out in attempts to break through Ukrainian defenses. Without regrouping, they won't succeed.
Despite heavy losses and a clear lack of tangible results, Russian Chief of General Staff Valery Gerasimov declared that the offensive will continue. According to him, the initiative currently lies with Russian forces. He explained the lack of territorial gains by claiming that Ukrainian troops held them back at great cost. However, he made no mention of Russian losses. In fact, some Russian units remain encircled in Donetsk region for nearly 2 weeks now, following a failed breakthrough attempt against Ukrainian defenses.
We're not just clearing areas. We're also launching small counteroffensives in these sectors. The enemy cannot maintain offensive operations there. They're trying to push from the northeast and southwest of Pokrovsk, but over several days of attempts, they've seen no real success. There are minor positional shifts on both sides, but the enemy is suffering the heaviest losses.
The Russian leadership appears indifferent to the losses. Their goal, to create the illusion of momentum and deceive Kiev's allies. According to the Institute for the Study of War, General Gerasimov consistently inflates battlefield gains. He claims that since the beginning of the year, Russian forces have captured 3,500 square kilometers and nearly 150 populated areas. However, Analysts say the real figures are about half of that. Russia's new defense minister, Andrei Belousov, echoed similar claims in late August, stating that Russian troops are seizing 600 to 700 square kilometers monthly. Experts put the actual number at a more modest 440 to 500 square kilometers per month during the summer.
The Kremlin appears to be trying to use large amounts of quantitative data to create the false impression that Russian forces are advancing at a fast rate on the battlefield. The Kremlin is trying to convince the West that Russia will inevitably achieve its war goals on the battlefield, such that Ukraine should concede to Russian demands and the West should therefore cease its support of Ukraine. From the Institute for the Study of War report.
Kiev's partners, however, aren't falling for these Russian tactics. On the contrary, they continue ramping up military support for Ukraine. This year alone, Ukraine is set to receive up to 3,500 ERAM missiles with associated equipment and services under a deal worth $825 million authorized by the U.S. Defense Security Cooperation Agency.
We're giving some deeper strike capabilities and most likely the Ukrainians are going to use them.
In addition to this new U.S. military support, the PURL program has come online. Under this initiative, European NATO members and Canada jointly purchase U.S. weapons for delivery to Ukraine. According to President Volodymyr Zelensky, this defense initiative has already raised $1.5 billion in support for Ukraine. Reported by Nikita Skoblikov, UATV News.
Russia's oil-addicted economy is cracking under pressure. A sharp drop in oil prices, a new wave of Western sanctions, and a stronger ruble have struck at the core of the country's financial stability. According to financial statements released just last week, Russia's biggest oil companies experienced their profits collapsing 2 to 3 times even in just first half of 2025. Such losses and massive assaults, by the way, on the Russian oil industry by Ukraine and refineries that resumed recently all sums up. Ukrainian drones reach all types of oil companies and refineries, shutting down oil processing and gasoline and diesel production to bare possible minimum. Exemplary in this regard is Russian Rosneft, which accounts for every second barrel pumped in Russia, reported a threefold decline in net profit attributable to shareholders from 773 billion rubles to just 245. Rosneft's CEO, Igor Sechin, explained the downturn as the result of OPEC nations ramping up production, which dragged global prices lower, coupled with wider discounts on Russian crude due to tougher EU and US sanctions.
Discounts on Russian oil widened due to tougher EU and US sanctions and the significant strengthening of the ruble, which had a negative impact on the financial results of oil exporters. I would like to note that the non-market formation of the national currency exchange rate ultimately leads to non-market, non-transparent pricing of oil and oil products in both the domestic and foreign markets. Igor Sechin, CEO of Rosneft, on the Rosneft website.
Overall, Russia's oil and gas sector, responsible for every third ruble in the state budget, lost over a mind-boggling 50% of its profits in the first half of the year alone, according not to us UATV, but to Russians, to Rosstat data. The combined financial decline is estimated 1.2 trillion rubles, while 45% of companies ended the 6th month with losses totaling 750 billion rubles. In the Khanty-Mansiysk autonomous district, Russia's top oil-producing region that supplies 40% of the country's crude, the sector turned unprofitable, with losses over 506 billion rubles between January and May. According to Turkmenstat, analysts at Cifra Broker note that the sector remains squeezed between a strong ruble and low oil prices. Urals crude, which once traded near $70 per barrel approximately at the start of the year, dropped to 52.1. In May, with some growth of 59.8 in June, its ruble equivalent quotes plunged nearly 30% in 6 months, down to about 4,700 rubles per barrel. And recent successful Ukrainian attacks on Russian energy sector have turned down as much as 21% of all oil processing industry and turned Russia indeed into the, I quote, gas station masquerading as a country, as per John McCain. Well, even before Mr. McCain, Russians themselves called their country just that. And more pressure comes from tightened sanctions on Russia's energy sector, says Elena Galeva of the Geyser Institute of Russia. G7 nations have imposed an oil embargo, while restrictions now extend to shipping and logistics through the crackdown on Russia's so-called shadow fleet. A technological embargo and financial restrictions, including blocking settlements in dollars of the deals, remains in place, and pressure on banks in third countries is intensifying. So much for sanctions are not working. We heard these voices, and Russia can easily survive it all. Well, we'll see about that. Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit. The SCO is a political, economical, and security forum created in 2001 by China, Russia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan, which has since expanded to include India and Pakistan in 2017, Iran in 2023, and Belarus in 2024, whose dictator Alexander Lukashenko attended this summit this year. Last month, Armenia also applied to join the SCO, and its Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan also attended the summit. While SCO members occasionally have conducted joint military exercises for what they called border security purposes, the organization has failed to evolve into a formal military alliance. I wonder if the reason for that could be a trust issue. It's just maybe too many dictators per square meter to develop necessary trust level. The two-day summit was held in the northern Chinese city of Tianjin. A huge declaration was signed, indeed, against poverty, against terror, against criminal aggression, against abducting children, against invading other countries, against all bad things in the world. And there was just one topic. They did not talk about it, SCO.
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine has taken into account the results of the meeting of the Council of Heads of State of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in Tianjin. We find it telling that the main outcome document of the summit, the 20-page Tianjin Declaration, doesn't contain any mention of Russia's war against Ukraine. It is surprising that the largest war of aggression in Europe since World War II was not reflected in such an important fundamental document, while it mentions a number of other wars, terrorist attacks, and events in the world. Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine.
Surprising? I don't think so. You don't talk about terror if you sponsor it, right? How did you expect Xi Jinping of China to actually come out and say, we are here to condemn international terror? Right, Vladimir? And Putin stands up and says, sure, let us all condemn our good old Russian criminal aggression and terror in Ukraine. We killed dozens of civilians and 5 children just one day alone, while getting ready for this very summit. And Narendra Modi is brought to tears and just stops buying Russian oil. And the SCO after party is thrown in The Hague at ICC headquarters to help those indicted Russian dictators. No, it just doesn't happen. Dictators and their vassals discussed other plans. Also, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit was a big victory for Putin. The Power of Siberia 2 pipeline building memorandum was approved by China. Building a pipe through Mongolia to China that will allow Russia to compensate for the European exports is a big threat to Ukraine. Obviously, it will help Russia to fund the war in the longer perspective. Overall, over 21 documents between China and Russia were signed at the summit, indicating further dependence of Russia on the oriental neighbor.
China and Russia have always conducted practical cooperation in various fields, including energy, on the basis of mutual respect and mutual benefit. Regarding the specific project you mentioned, I would suggest you check with the relevant Chinese authorities.
While the American administration is still considering sanctions against Russia, which are on the table according to U.S. Head of Treasury, China makes Russia its loyal ally by supporting energy projects and opening visa-free regime for Russians. The house rules of a few countries should not be imposed on others, Xi Jinping told more than 20 world leaders gathered at a 2-day summit orchestrated to play up China's global leadership, of course, and its close and enduring partnership with Russia. Without naming the United States directly, Xi, however, vowed to oppose hegemonism, Cold War mentality, and bullying practices, phrases often deployed by Beijing to criticize Washington. I'm sure they especially like those phrasing bullying practices in Taiwan. Also, China has emerged as a key pillar of diplomatic and economic support for Putin's regime since the early days of the Ukrainian invasion, even as it claims neutrality in the conflict, which is an open lie. Of course, China helped Russian terror in Ukraine, obviously, and it does it for money. As these days profits just skyrocket, Chinese firms have bought up swaths of discounted Russian oil and provided it with critical trade, including dual-use goods that Western leaders say have powered Russia's defense industrial base. Beijing calls it a normal trade with Russia. In case you did not know, let me put it to you straightforward. China is, and always will be super pragmatic. If it is good for China, it is happening. And that is what we all must grasp about CSO summit just as well. China does not care how many civilians or children Putin kills daily in Ukraine. And China will never care. India, too. Narendra Modi might say, I quote him, India and Russia have always stood shoulder to shoulder even in the most difficult times. Well, of course, why not? Especially if that is a difficult times for Ukraine, suffering from Russian terror, not India. And India just stays shoulder to shoulder with aggressor and child murderer, that is Vladimir Putin of Russia. So both in general and in particular, the slogan of the SCO summit could be brought to just one simple sentence. Let's come together and talk about peace. Then do what China says. It was Henry Keane. Thank you so very much for standing with Ukraine. Please subscribe so to stay tuned to what is happening in the world, shown to you by UATV from Ukrainian perspective. Thank you. Goodbye.